In a society so widely extended as Freemasonry, the branches of which are extended over the 4 quarters of the globe, it cannot be denied that we have many members of rank and opulence.
During his initiation, every apprentice Mason is told that Freemasonry is a moral organization, and its 3 guiding principles are brotherly love, relief, and truth.
In more modern terms, you could probably describe them as brotherly love, toleration, tolerating other people's ideas, getting on with people whether they hold the same ideas as you or not. Relief, charity in its widest sense, not just giving money, but giving of your time, your talents, your expertise within the community as a whole. And truth, striving to be as truthful as you can in your dealings with other people, in the way you carry out your daily life, and sort of acting squarely with people.
But these sentiments have a hollow ring for some disillusioned Masons.
Brotherly love, relief and truth has been replaced by envy, hypocrisy and lies.
It will be thankfully received and faithfully applied.
Have you anything to give in the cause of charity?
I have to give my talents to the Masonry.
Were you deprived of everything valuable previously to entering the lodge?
Yes.
If you had not been so deprived, would you give freely?
Yes, I would.
Worshipful Master.
A brother is asked for money, for charity, and they make sure he has none. And they say to him, you will remember that peculiar moment when you were first admitted into Freemasonry, figuratively poor and penniless. Now then, I know that that is done to impress the charitable work of Freemasons. But there's men at the top don't give money. When I was the charity rep, I had a write job to get from the top Freemasons, Grand Lodge officers, £5 a year. I had to write to them sometimes 3 times.
I command of you, worshipful Master, I give you the Tyler's toast. To all poor and distressed Freemasons where'er dispersed over the face of earth and water.
Tonight, we examine 3 cases which call into question Masonry's claims of brotherly love and truth.
To all poor and distressed Freemasons.
And we look at Freemasonry's record on charity. Masonic charity is not like rattling collecting cans on street corners. Each member is expected to give what he can afford, and Freemasonry is like a big mutual assurance fund, with most of what Masons give to charity going to fellow Masons or their families who've fallen on hard times. They raise money for Masons' widows and children, for a Masonic school, and for charities serving the Masonic aged and sick. They have their own hospital, the Royal Masonic in London. For these holy Masonic causes, the Brotherhood's charities in England and Wales collect and expend around £16 million each year. But recently, local newspapers have been deluged with hundreds of stories about Freemasons' gifts to non-Masonic charities. Apparently, the Masons are building a new image, as the Kent Evening Post reported in June 1987, when Masons handed a cheque to a Chatham hospital.
Masons have been told to build a new image and go public on some of their good works.
Increasingly today, Freemasonry gives from the money it raises to non-Masonic causes. This minibus was presented to help the aged by Masons in the...
Armed with their own public relations video, rank-and-file Masons now emphasize a new outward-looking image.
Freemasonry in this country and throughout the world has done a great deal towards the community, and no more can this be seen than in the question of the amount of money that Freemasonry gives to charities which have nothing whatsoever to do with Freemasonry. As you will know, they've given £250,000 to the Great Ormond Street Appeal.
But we've discovered that of every £20 collected and spent in 1988 by English Freemasonry's national charities, £19 went on Masons or their dependents, and just £1 to non-Masonic charities. Out of a total of £16 million, only £800,000 went to other causes. So despite their new image, the Brethren, it seems, still prefer to look after their own. The Masons have been cleaning up their image for a more particular reason, to fight mounting opposition from Christians. In 1986, while a Church of England inquiry was trying to decide whether Freemasonry was incompatible with Christianity, the Brotherhood announced it was giving sums of £5,000 to Salisbury and 3 other cathedrals. Since then, many more cathedrals have each been given £5,000. Masons say this is to help save Britain's architectural heritage and to honour the stonemasons from whom they claim descent, but Anglican priest John Lawrence is not convinced.
It's a strange coincidence that as Freemasonry has been seen in rather a bad light recently by the Church of England, that they're now giving more money to it. Now, is it to cull favour? Well, I suppose everybody has their own opinions on that. I would ask, why don't they give it secretly? Why do they make such a fanfare of publicity about it?
Great architect of the universe, may we who are blessed remember those in need.
The truth is that for all its talk of charity, Freemasonry is mainly a social club, and each lodge is a meeting place where men of substance eat, drink and discuss common interests. At local and national level, they probably give an average of £10 a head to non-Masonic causes, but this pales into insignificance compared with the hundreds of pounds each Mason spends every year on Masonic wining, dining and dressing up.
I think you can truthfully say that it's no use becoming a Freemason if you haven't got a bob or two. Because if you go to your Masonic lodge and you pay for your meal, and then you go to the installations and the ladies' evenings and all the other social functions, they're not cheap, you see. Not cheap at all.
Ain't seen the sunshine, I don't know when, stuck in Folsom Prison, time gets dragging on.
If helping worthy causes were a Mason's prime aim, he could do it just as well outside the lodge. For example, the charity Country and Western concerts which non-Mason John Whatman and his friends put on in the early 1980s helped raise £250,000 for Stoke Mandeville Hospital. So it's poignant that this man of charity suspects he was forced into bankruptcy as a result of action by Freemasons in and around the small Oxfordshire town of Watlington. In 1982, Whatman bought an old pub on the outskirts of the town. Called the Carrier's Arms, it was well known for live music. Whatman started putting on different music each night, and the new venture thrived. But some local residents complained there was too much noise from the pub. The police were soon paying calls, sometimes 3 or 4 times a night.
I never found out anyone's name who had been complaining. In the end, I was just told they were anonymous calls. And really, looking back on it, the amount of time that must have been wasted on anonymous calls from Thames Valley Police was incredible, really. Just coming from Tame alone must have taken them 15 minutes. And if they're doing this 3 times a night, some nights.
A pub's drinks licence must be renewed every year. But when Whatman's came up for renewal, he found out that a hostile petition had been raised in the name of a ratepayers association. He started a counter-petition, but 2 local traders told him they couldn't sign because they were in the same Masonic lodge as the man organising the petition against him, Robert Hilton. This connection was later confirmed by a confidential Masonic directory which lists Robert Hilton as a past master of Watlington's Icknield Way Lodge. It also names the 2 traders who refused to sign Whatman's petition and 3 more of his neighbours. Mr. Hilton says he organised the petition on behalf of other residents, not for himself, and denies that Masons were ganging up on Whatman. But Whatman's drinks licence was renewed. So was his music licence, after council tests proved the music did not reach nuisance level. Even when live bands were playing, the meters proved the noisiest sound outside the pub was the squeaking of the pub sign. Yet Whatman's problems got worse.
The pressure from the police was incredible. I mean, they were coming down, one particular night, they came down, I think there was 4 times in an evening, and sat outside in the car park till everyone had gone. Now, if you run a public house, it's very difficult to run it successfully if police are there all the time. And it was then that I began to think they're doing it for a reason, to stop customers coming.
Convinced that police pressure was ruining business, Whatman decided to quit. He closed the pub and put it on the market, but before he could find a buyer, the drinks licence had to be renewed again. This time the police objected, not because of the noise, but in effect because of the silence. They claimed the shut-down pub was a temptation to burglars. At the last minute, 7 police officers came to the court to give evidence, but as Watman's barrister had not been notified, they were not allowed to testify. Even so, the magistrates decided against him.
They were out for half an hour and they came back and decided that I didn't have a pub licence anymore.
Even though, in a sense, no evidence?
No evidence was given at all. No evidence was given against me as a person, whatever, you know.
The magistrate's decision brought financial disaster on John Watman. He had to sell the Carrier's arms for £30,000 less than he paid and was forced into bankruptcy. But now he felt he was assembling more and more pieces of a Masonic jigsaw. He had long been puzzled by the attitude of Inspector Ron Duncan, who had been in charge of the officers from Tame Police Station who had paid so many visits to the Carriers. But Duncan was not only a police officer, as Watman now learned from a friend who was a former policeman.
He himself was a Freemason, and he said to me, did I know that Inspector Duncan was also a Freemason from the St Mary's Lodge at Tame, where all the lodges meet in that area? And I says, no, I said I knew nothing about the Masonic there. And then he pointed out all the people that were involved with what happened to me who were Freemasons.
Watman made many complaints against Thames Valley Police, alleging harassment, but a 20-month inquiry found no evidence to justify taking any action against any officers. He's still convinced he was victimised, but the mere fact that most of the people he came up against were on the square proves not conspiracy, only coincidence. He's now back in his old job as an engineer. It's ironic that he's using Freemasonry's symbolic tools for a practical purpose, making walking aids for disabled children. Dissatisfied with the police investigation, Watman has taken his complaint to English Freemasonry's headquarters.
We looked at it, we find that there are 2 people who opposed the grant of a licence for his pub because they believed it was going to be noisy and disturb them, and those 2 people happened to be Freemasons. Nothing to do with the lodge at all.
Can you understand why, though, that he should see a Masonic conspiracy when he discovers that many of the people who he perceives to be against him, ratepayers, leaders, councillors, policemen, are all Freemasons who all meet at the same Freemasons' Hall?
I can't understand it because I know that Freemasonry isn't for that sort of thing.
Some people might think you're sort of paranoid, you're imagining the whole thing.
I think that's how they get away with it, that they like to interpret it that way. But I don't think I'm paranoid. I've stuck at it for 5 years now to try and prove in some way or another what can, or what can be misused within the Masonic organisation.
Arthur Edmonds is a Freemason, but he also feels that his life has been ruined by the charitable brotherhood known as Freemasonry. He and his wife Joyce were running a travel firm called Cruise Drive Tours Limited in the 1970s, when friends suggested that they should organise cruises for Masons and their families.
You seriously declare that unbiased by the improper solicitation of friends against your own inclination, and uninfluenced by mercenary or other unworthy motive, you freely and voluntarily offer yourself as a candidate for the privileges and mysteries of Freemasonry?
I do.
I do.
At his initiation, every Mason swears not to use Freemasonry for personal profit. As a past lodge master, Arthur Edmonds was well aware of this, but the whole point of the cruises was that all profits would go to Masonic charity. It's unusual for Masons to raise money like this, but with the help of a Masonic colleague, he got clearance from Grand Lodge and advertised in the national press. The first cruise was a huge success, and a second was needed to meet demand, but Edmonds was steaming into troubled waters.
I was summoned before the Grand Secretary. I thought, oh good, I'm going to be congratulated for raising, I think by then it was about £28,000 for charities.
But the Grand Secretary at the time, James Stubbs, did not offer congratulations. According to Arthur Edmonds, the meeting, which took place here at Freemasons' Hall, was anything but pleasant. Referring to letters of complaint from a few Masons, the Grand Secretary said he was opposed to Masonic cruises in general and advertising them in particular.
I'm not having it, he said. No more. I said, no, man. Masonry teaches me to look after charities. And that's what I'm doing, quite legally and with your permission. I said, you are conducting a star chamber with me, and I won't have it. With that, I walked out of his room.
Grand Lodge then dropped a bombshell in the quarterly communication or newsletter which it sends to every English Mason. It stated,
"The board wishes to make it clear that recent advertisements and circulars about so-called Masonic cruises do not have its approval or sanction. The board strongly deprecates the association of Freemasonry with commercial ventures and does not consider that any statement that profits from such ventures will be devoted to Masonic charity affects this situation."
For Arthur and Joyce Edmonds, this was catastrophic. They'd contracted to pay £250,000 for ships for further Masonic charity cruises. But after the newsletter was read out in all lodges, bookings dried up and cancellations poured in. Edmonds was not just under attack from Grand Lodge. The very charities which had taken the money from his cruises were now denying they'd ever got any.
All of a sudden, we were having cheques returned by the charities. They wouldn't accept them. One particular one, the Masonic Hospital, stated that they could not state whether any money had ever been received from Cruise Drive Tours Limited, or me. And yet before that I'd had masses of congratulatory letters and I had every receipt.
15 years earlier, Edmonds had been charged with deception and fraud in connection with another business. He says he was framed, but his barrister had strongly advised him to plead guilty and he was sentenced to 3 years in jail. The implication now that he had pocketed money destined for charity was like history repeating itself.
I myself called in Scotland Yard Fraud Squad and made them check all the books. I asked the Department of Trade and Industry to check all the books with all the bank statements and all the checks.
The fraud squad found nothing wrong, and for years Edmonds tried to clear his Masonic reputation and get a fair hearing from Grand Lodge. Eventually, the new Grand Secretary, Michael Hyam, responded in a letter that he'd seen no evidence that any charity money raised by Edmonds had been misapplied. But this didn't solve Edmonds' problem.
I couldn't contact all the Masons in England. So I asked him to produce that letter or a statement in the Grand Lodge quarterly communication, which itself had ruined me. Refused.
Mr. Edmonds asked you to reproduce that letter in the quarterly communication to clear his name. Why did you refuse to do that?
Because I didn't reckon that I was in the business of clearing his name. What we had done was to stop his cruises being described as Masonic with apparently Grand Lodge's approval. He asked me for a different assurance, and I went as far as I thought I reasonably could, and I did so in that letter.
Edmonds had been ruined. As a result of Grand Lodge's actions, Cruise Drive Tours had gone bankrupt, and he and his wife were reduced to living on the dole.
Surely they would not deliberately have destroyed your business and made you bankrupt?
I think for power, they would have done anything. And the power being that they can wield over ordinary Masons.
Not even its staunchest defenders would claim Freemasonry as democratic. But sometimes the hierarchy's preoccupation with rank and ceremonial can be offensive to ordinary brethren, such as when officers from Grand Lodge visit the more humble outposts of the craft.
These top brass come into a lodge, you have to give them salutation. And it annoys me immensely that you have to pay homage to the man. Some of them you give them 7 salutes, some 5, some 3. And then the man who is the most senior Mason will say, "We thank you for your salutations." And you know damned well he's a hypocrite.
Freemason Leonard Acklam is a past master of the Brighouse Lodge in Brighouse, Yorkshire. Now running a china shop, he was previously a plumbing and heating engineer. Some years ago, he instructed a solicitor to take action to recover a debt of £10,000. For a whole year, whenever Acklam asked what was happening, the solicitor fobbed him off with excuses, until Acklam eventually heard from a court clerk that the case had been lost by default.
It had been dropped in the bin. I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "You've lost by default." How can I have lost by default? Because your solicitor had appointment at Huddersfield Crown Court with the defendant's solicitor, and your solicitor never turned up. My God. £10,000 down the drain.
Like Acklam, the solicitor who failed to turn up in court was a Freemason. As such, he should have been bound by the ritual oath to support brother Masons.
I will not injure him myself.
I will not injure him myself.
Or knowingly suffer it to be done by others.
Or knowingly suffer it to be done by others.
If in my power to prevent...
Acklam was bound by the same oath, but felt that the solicitor's negligence should not go unpunished. He sought advice on whether or not to sue his brother Mason. That's when the pressure started.
Shortly after that, I was paid a visit in my place of business by a very high-ranking Freemason, very high-ranking, and told that if I started any action against this particular solicitor, I would lose a lot of friends. I was told I had to look on it in a true Masonic manner and forget it. After all, you can afford it. Now then, he doesn't know whether I'm skint, whether I have two halfpennies to rub together or what.
The high-ranking Mason was Sir Herbert Redfern, Grand Officer of English Freemasonry and a former chairman of the National Union of Conservative and Unionist Associations.
Why on earth would he see fit to interfere in a private dispute?
To protect his own Masonic member. Nothing anymore. You see, I'm a nobody. I'm not a high-ranking Freemason. I'm the fellow with the pick and shovel that does the work. If you see what I mean. I mean, these are the fellows that go and sit on the top table and shout how wonderful Freemasonry is, and then go back to the hypocrisy when they've taken their Masonic pinny off and the Masonic collar and the Masonic gloves.
Acklam was so outraged by Redfern's interference in a private dispute and the use of Masonic pressure that he protested to the Provincial Grand Lodge and then to Grand Lodge in London. An internal Masonic inquiry has just been set up, but Sir Herbert's now dead, and it's 8 years since Acklam first complained about attempted Masonic blackmail.
Why do you think Grand Lodge and the Yorkshire West Riding have done nothing about it?
Because of the rank of the man involved. I mean, he was closely associated with the Prime Minister, Cabinet Ministers. He's a very, very top man, was a top man. He's chairman of the magistrates. He's a very top man, not only a top Freemason, but a man with muscle, if you like.
Mr. Acklam, in a general sense, says that he believes that there is one law for those at the top of Freemasonry and that the rank and file are treated in a totally different way. How do you react to that charge?
I don't think that I can agree with it. At least in theory, the thing happens the same for everybody. And we are still trying to find out what Mr. Acklam is, the truth of Mr. Acklam's complaints.
In practice, is everybody treated the same?
I'd like to think so.
Like John Watman and Arthur Edmonds, Leonard Acklam is typical of hundreds of people, many of them staunch Masons, who believe, rightly or wrongly, that the Brotherhood has interfered with their business or destroyed their livelihood. Sometimes truth, relief and brotherly love seem a bit thin on the ground.
I believe that the ordinary members of Freemasonry, generally speaking, you'll always find the black sheep, are genuine and good. But the higher they get in the rank, the more they seem to change, to become little Hitlers. They're just little dictators who tell you what to do and will not listen to a single word. They don't even ask your defence till afterwards.
Brotherly love, relief and truth. That is Freemasonry. And I'm afraid we've too many men at the top who do not believe in brotherly love, relief and truth. They believe in themselves. What is in it for me?